Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. We're now on 32 episodes. It's been crazy, and I've got to say, as the podcast continues to progress and continues to evolve, probably is the word I would use. For me, it's getting a lot more exciting. Before we get into today's topic, I wanted to basically just quickly say that I'm very kind of open in terms of where this podcast can go. And, for me, it's largely always going to be driven by what you guys want to, what you want to listen to, what you want to see appear on this podcast. Because at the end of the day, while I don't have a big following right now, there are people communicating to me here and there that are saying that they enjoy the podcast and that they like the way that it's actually going right now, like the format, which tells me that, that coupled with the stats that I look at for things like YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everything in between, it indicates to me that you guys want to continue seeing the interviews, which I love to do, so don't worry, those are always going to be prevalent, they're always going to be a part of this podcast, and I feel like they'll probably be more than likely the bigger part of the podcast. I mean, it in terms of, like, if we quickly talk about business for a second, it's the type of thing where, it draws more people in, obviously. One of my initial thoughts with having guests on the show is that their audience will then want to hear them being interviewed, which, draws people from them to my own audience. So it's kind of like, I can potentially grow my audience through those people. Yeah, I'm being absolutely transparent with that, But it wasn't just about that. I also thought that it would be quite an interesting test for myself to see if I could interview people, how it would go. I've seen other people do it. Shout out to the Saab Powers podcast. That was a podcast that I appeared on very many months ago, and I really liked his setup. He was able to do it very, very quickly, and I took some inspiration from him and from Joe Rogan as well in terms of, like, the podcast style. But I've kind of developed my own style in terms of, like, I do a lot of research on my guests, and then, I ad-lib according to how the podcast goes. So it can potentially go a lot longer and be very detailed, if that's the way it's going to go, or it can be a lot shorter. And, I kind of make that judgment, I suppose, on the day and see how it goes. Which is another element of why this is so interesting, because you never know how it's going to go. And obviously I don't want it to go bad, but if it does go bad, that's a challenge in of itself. It's like, how can I turn this into something interesting? How can I make it interesting? And that brings me to the topics that I'm doing right now. So obviously, there haven't been many Christian-only podcasts where it's just been me talking at length about a particular topic. And a lot of the reason for that is because, they don't do as well. Maybe you guys aren't as interested in that. The views certainly would corroborate that line of thinking. But at the same time, I still want to do them. Part of it is necessity, For instance, recently I invited Dutch Deals to become a permanent part of the podcast. But again, he's not always going to be available, which means that I have to find something to continue the podcast and keep it going. But I didn't want to just put out any old crap, you know what I mean? Like, that's not an excuse to just put stuff out just to keep it going. I've got to sit down and think about it and do my research. Think about, is this something I can talk about at length? Is this something that I could make an hour-long podcast out of? And, the more and more that my view count grows on platforms such as, Apple and Spotify and such, the more I think about that and think about the fact that, is this something that you would actually want to listen to? Is there going to be anything of interest within this? Is it the sort of thing that you can sit and, I don't know, be at your desk or on your way to work or whatever the case may be, and have this as something that you listen to and subscribe to every week? And when I started thinking about that, I started first of all, panicking, and secondly, thinking about, okay, well, what can I do to make this interesting? What can I do? But I felt this weight of responsibility, and it's a good thing. It makes me think, okay, I've got these regular viewers and it's growing, the podcast is growing. What can I do to appease everyone? What can I do to make this a good quality podcast that people want to keep subscribing to and, keep listening to? I don't want to lose anyone, obviously. And I've been told by a lot of people that apparently I'm doing a good job, which I really appreciate. So thank you to those people. I'm always open to criticism, by the way, or just general feedback. So if there is anything that you would like to hear me talk about, or if, there's something that you don't like, let me know, because, this is always a growing project. It's always going to be open to criticism, even if it goes above and beyond and becomes really successful. There's always ways we can improve it, and my ears will always be open as far as that is concerned. But just really quickly before we get into our main topic, I just wanted to kind of say that this is the reason that I'm testing different formats out. Having Dutch Deals on board is a great thing for him as well. This wasn't just about me; it was also about giving him an opportunity. He was one of the first people that I thought of in terms of people that I could have on the show that are reliable. And, that I have a decent chemistry with as well, because you need people that you just click with. And for those of you that have listened to the TCJ podcast that I did before this, you'll know that I had a very good chemistry with Childish Jacko and Trial by Fire. And I've never actually met those guys in real life. And it's the same with Dutch Deals. It's the sort of thing where we wanted to do this thing. And we thought, okay, let's try this. Let's see how it works. And that is a gamble, because if you've never met someone and you haven't not known them for that long, then you are making a gamble in terms of whether or not you have chemistry. And that's not to say that it's anything wrong with what you're doing if you don't have chemistry. I mean, chemistry is just something that's either there or it's not. Do you know what I mean? It's like a relationship. You either fancy each other and there's something that draws you in, or there's nothing and you move on. And I've been very lucky where that's concerned in terms of the people I've met. So I think that choosing Dutch Deals to kind of appear on this podcast is something that it just came straight away. I knew I needed some people to be on here on a more permanent basis, and I'll always be looking for people to join my team moving forward. So if you would like to join the Christian Reeve podcast and be like a co-host or be involved behind the scenes, then let me know and get in touch. And that's definitely, there's always work to be done. There's always stuff, ways that I want to grow this and turn it into something much bigger than what it is. And if you're the right fit, you're the right fit. And I felt that Dutch Deals was the right fit. Obviously I'm keeping in mind that he might not be available forever. These things happen, people come and go, that's just life. And also it's the nature of what we do as far as YouTube is concerned. He has his own life and he has his goals and aspirations, as do I. And that's why I'm keeping it a very open thing, where I'm kind of having all of these different options on the podcast. So whatever happens, it's not going to drastically affect the podcast one way or the other. And I kind of like that as well, because it's like, it gives you, the viewers, something as far as like a randomness is concerned. Like, you never know what to expect, what the next episode is going to be. And I like that. I think that makes it more engaging, makes it more interesting, maybe. I mean, I would find that interesting, I guess. But I think the more that we do this podcast and the more that we grow our following and stuff, and when we get to a point where my audience, you guys, are more kind of responsive and you let me know what you like and what you don't like, we'll be able to kind of factor that in and kind of cultivate, what am I talking about? Kind of structure the podcast accordingly so that it appeals to those interests and to those things that you guys want. So yeah, just wanted to quickly say that. Now, shall I get on to the main event? I think so. I'm not going to let you guys suffer that preamble any longer. How long have I been talking now? Oh my god, 10 minutes. And because I wanted to get that out quickly, I've started speaking quicker, which I've noticed is something that I do when I'm a bit nervous, or especially when I'm doing vlogs or podcasts. But we'll try to slow it down. So skateboarding. How did I get to skateboarding? Well, many of you might not know this, but actually I used to do skateboarding quite a lot. And when I thought back on this topic and how I would do this topic and what I would talk about, it actually brought up a lot of different points and areas that I could focus on. But I realized, especially when I've spoken to people about this in the past, that I actually did this for a very, very long time and quite frequently. And it's one of those things that in later life has I've just dropped out of, and it's something that I will get back into, and we'll get into that later. But life happens, things happen, and sometimes your hobbies just get put to one side, or you forget about them for a while. And it's weird because skateboarding was such a major part of my life growing up and influenced me in so many different ways. I mean, for example, when I look at my music taste, a lot of the music that I grew up listening to came from, that skateboarding culture, be it through, people that I would skate with, and I would find out what music they were listening to, or, when I was first starting out and I was looking up to people and they were like twice my age and they had like this music blaring out and I'd want to know what it was. Or, when it comes to like the Tony Hawk games, for example, they were a major factor. They introduced me to so many different genres like ska, punk, hip hop, heavy metal, rock. I mean, I was already familiar with some of these genres anyway, but they gave me a very kind of rich mix and diverse mix of music. And really, I think what I liked most about skateboarding, as far as culture is concerned, is that anyone could be a skateboarder. It didn't really matter what background you came from. It was this kind of thing where, you could be a massive metalhead and be a skateboarder. You could be a punk and be a skateboarder. You could be a hip-hop only guy and be a skateboarder. And no one gave a shit. And it was at a time when, when I was at school, and I've spoken about this in previous podcasts before, but there was this big thing on identity and, which clique do you belong to? It was a bit like America, I suppose, with like the jocks and the nerds and all this stuff. But this was actually a real thing growing up when I was at school. And, I was part of, I guess at school it was either you were mainstream or you were part of the alternative crowd. There were different groups within that crowd, but ultimately it was just one big crowd. But I was into a lot of different things. I liked my heavy metal music and rock. I liked my hip hop. I liked skateboarding. I liked playing guitar. I liked playing Xbox and playing football. I had all these different interests, and it meant that I was able to have friends from all different backgrounds and stuff. But I really feel like skateboarding was the one kind of thing that tied a lot of those things together. And in terms of meeting people, it was a great way to do that and to kind of just have something that was a common ground, common interest. I mean, it's like if you play football, if you're a kid growing up and you're a boy or even a girl, it doesn't really matter, whatever, but if you can play football, it's a great way of meeting people. You know what I mean? And a lot of the time, you don't have to be particularly good or bad. You just, if someone has a football, you show up and you start playing, right? And it's the same with skateboarding. If you know how to skate, you can just turn up to any old skate park, or you don't even have to go to a skate park. You can just literally be finding some spots around your local hometown or whatever and start skating them. And it's funny as well, I've said before how, when you're a musician, for example, for many years, it changes your perception of how you see, like gigs and live bands and stuff. Like, you never quite see it in the same way. And it's the same with skateboarding. Like, a lot of the time I'll be walking around spots randomly, and if I'm not really consciously thinking, I'm just, my mind's elsewhere, I'll be looking at spots and I'll be like, oh, that'd be a good spot to do this trick, or that'd be great to skate with. And it's like, even though I haven't been skating in quite a few years properly, I still kind of see the world as like one big skate park. Like, and especially when you go to places like university and stuff. I mean, it's like those places are just made for skateboarding, and they weren't constructed with that in mind. It's what I found funny about the games, actually, the Tony Hawk's games, because a lot of the time, a lot of the pieces, like if you did the create a park thing and you would create your own skate park, a lot of the pieces would be like just general buildings that would have skatable parts on them. And I always found that funny, because that is very true of real life. A lot of the time you can make anything skatable. And this has just come back to me as well. A lot of the time we would carry wax with us, which is not. I guess people that don't skate might not know this, but if you're trying to grind, is what we call grind, which is when you see people skating on top of like a rail or a pole or something like that for an indeterminate number of seconds. That's called grinding. And a lot of the time, when you're trying to skate a surface, if you're trying to skate a surface that is normally grindable, then you will what we call wax up that. So you would literally just rub the wax on that rail and start skating it, and it just makes it easier to slide along the surface. And in many cases, if you do it properly, obviously, if you put too much wax on there, it makes it really slippery and you'll just fall off. But if you do it properly, then you'll actually be able to skate it much easier. But it takes a while to get the hang of it and get it properly done right. And a lot of the time, at least I found, I'd have to wax it a little bit, do a couple of grinds on it, see how it felt, and then probably come back and wax it a little bit more. But you could also do this for surfaces that weren't always supposed to be skated upon. And sometimes it'll work, like if you have like a low wall or something that you want to skate, and if you put like enough wax on the edge, you might be able to just get away with doing a grind or whatever. But it's funny how these things come back to you. Like, this is how I knew this would be a good topic, because I literally haven't thought about that in, God, it must be at least 10 years now. Something like that. That's crazy. I guess I officially properly stopped skateboarding when I was about 17, at least like all the time. But and then since then it's been like sporadic, like every now and again, like a couple of times a year, if that. But I think it truly ended when I was at university. I guess we'll work backwards actually with this. Yeah, we'll go backwards, and just gonna quickly write that down. Lost my train of thought there. Yeah, we'll work backwards. So basically, I stopped skateboarding around university time. So I started university when I was 21. So this was about 2014, and I finished university in 2017. But during that time, I had a skateboard. I can't remember if I think I brought it with me. Yeah, I had some professional decks left over, and between the ages of like 17 to 21, I did skate, but a lot less, because during that time I was working full time. I was also in a heavy metal band for about 2.5 years, and then in a couple of other bands. So music and work took over my life for that period, which meant there was very little time for skateboarding. And in the years prior, it had been such a massive part of my life. But as I got older, I kind of discovered music was a real big passion of mine. And while skateboarding was something that I was passionate about, it was something that I'd done for so long. And for me, it was more of a leisure activity. It was something that I did to just kind of get away from stuff and not think about stuff. Like, that's why it was perfect when I was at school. It was just the perfect thing to do. And it's funny, like, you could go entire days skateboarding without talking to anyone. So it was a good way to kind of, I suppose, work out your demons. And it's good activity in that sense, because it's like you can either do it with friends and it's fun in that sense and you can play games and stuff, or you can do it by yourself. And a lot of the time when you're practicing and learning tricks, then doing it on your own is important. It's like any other sport in that sense, football, basketball. Sometimes you just need to spend some time, practicing a particular thing, and then you come back and then you're with your friends. But skateboarding is one of those things that's like, I think it's much better when you're with people, because it's more enjoyable. You can watch each other skateboarding and kind of help each other out in that sense. And there's a lot of camaraderie. I hope I said that word right. Camaraderie. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, Christian. Focus. Yeah, I can remember. I have very fond memories of many summers skateboarding. Just a whole entire summers were spent like that. Like not all the time. I would do other stuff. Girls, concerts, festivals, whatever. Right. But skateboarding was a massive part of my life growing up, and in particular, the summer was the best time when the sun's out and you're drinking and you're with your friends, and don't have to be drinking, but I just remember there being drinking. I guess it was like any other teenager growing up. You just have fun with your friends, but skateboarding was something that we all kind of shared and worked at and were passionate about. And I think that skateboarding, and I'm going to talk about why I love skateboarding real quick, because this is one of the points I wrote. I think one of the biggest reasons that I love skateboarding, and always will, is because it teaches you a lot of life lessons. And it's funny because skateboarding traditionally, I'm not sure so much now, but traditionally has always been given this like antisocial label, like, oh, it's the outcast kids that do that, oh, it's troublemakers, only antisocial kids do skateboarding. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, skateboarding teaches you life lessons that some people go their whole lives without learning. For example, perseverance and not giving up. Sometimes you'll be learning a trick and it will take you a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. Sometimes you'll be spending months, maybe even years, trying to master a particular trick or land a particular spot, and it can be very difficult in terms of how it preys on your mind and how it kind of pushes you, but also kind of defeats you. Sometimes you have entire days where you're trying so hard to land this trick, and that's all you want to do. It's all you can think about, and you just can't do it. And, there are some people in life that would just give up and go, oh, I just can't do it. It's just not possible. And then there are other people who just keep trying and keep pushing. And that, to me, is kind of the heart of what skateboarding is at its roots. It's about pushing yourself as far as you can go. It's about realizing what's possible. It's about actualization, just realizing your potential and pushing yourself beyond that. And that's really one of the biggest reasons why I love skateboarding so much. I just feel that it's good. It's good. It's good for building up confidence and motivation. And I've used that same mentality in so many other areas of my life. I never give up straight away. I try every single thing before I even contemplate the idea of giving up. And I've applied that to relationships, friendships, work, you name it. I can think of very few times in my life I have legitimately turned around and said, okay, I give up. Like it takes me a very, very, very long time, usually years, before I even consider such a thing. And I owe that to skateboarding. I think that skateboarding has done wonders for my mentality as far as that's concerned. But elsewhere, I think it's just a fun activity. Like I said before, it has a lot of camaraderie. I mean, it's something where, you can just have a laugh, and it doesn't really matter what age you are. Like real quick, I just want to talk about the game of skate, and I'm going to write this down so I don't forget. Skate. Just on a side note, I actually do this where when I'm recording these podcasts, I write down ideas for future clips because I'll probably forget. Just a little, idea there for you of what I do behind the scenes. But anyway, not that you cared or asked. But anyway, one thing actually I find frustrating when I listen back to myself is how I use certain words a lot, like anyway, but, this. I try my very best not to do that, but sometimes it's inevitable. Anyway, skate. Other people may know this game as horse. I've heard it be referred to as many other things. Very straightforward game, a letter game where basically you take a letter. It can be played in two different ways. Either you take letters of skate, the word skate, according to you landing a trick, or you want to avoid taking letters. So it can be played like in that way or the other way around. I hope I've explained that properly. I'll explain it again. So basically, let's say we're playing a game of skate, and I say, okay, do a kickflip or a tray flip or varial kickflip or something like that. Then I would do the trick, and then you would have to land it. And if you don't land it, depending on the way that we're playing the game, if we're playing it in the sense that taking a letter is a bad thing, then you would take a letter for missing that trick. And the idea would be that I would keep setting a trick. So I keep trying different tricks, like a 360 shove it, boneless, inward heel flip. Maybe we'll incorporate the skate park into that, like jumping stair sets or whatever is around us. But usually it just comes down to basic tricks. And you would keep taking letters every time you miss. And but basically, as soon as I miss a trick, like let's say I don't land it when I'm trying to set the trick, then it would be your turn to start setting the tricks. And then I would potentially pick up letters. The other way that you can play the game is obviously every time you land the trick, then you get a letter, and the first to get to skate wins. So it can be played either way. But it's a really good way of learning new tricks, and it's also a very good way of practicing tricks as well, because you're watching the other person do the trick. So, you can kind of replicate what they're doing. And that's a lot of what skateboarding is about. It's about trying to replicate what other people do, but not necessarily exactly the way that they do it, because with skateboarding, you have different stances. For example, there's goofy and regular. I was goofy. A lot of people tend to be goofy, but a lot of people are regular too. And that just means, I think it's, if you're goofy, then you're sort of facing this way. If you're regular, you're facing this way. For those listening, that would be... goofy would be sort of facing to the left with your back to the right, and regular would be the other way around. I hope I've explained that properly. I probably haven't. It'd be much easier to show you if we were on a skate ramp. Then I could just show you what I mean. But yeah. So that's one element of it. And also just the way that people ride their skateboard. For instance, there was this thing that I noticed when we would be skating in a park where, let's say we're queuing up to take turns on a ramp, right, to do tricks off a what we call a kicker, which is like a small little ramp, usually with like a box element to it, where you would get a run up, basically either use the ramp as a push-off or use the ramp and do what we call an ollie to get extra air, and then do a trick over the box of some description. So basically, the way that you would do the run-up would be a style. So some people, I used to do this as well, where you would put the deck in front of you, and you would take a run-up and essentially jump onto the board. So you would actively run without the board, jump on the board, and then it would give you kind of a sudden push of momentum, and then you would go straight into the ramp. Other ways you could do it would be if you basically kick the board in front of you so it starts rolling, and then you do the run up that way. Other people just pushed off and started, skating that way. I mean, there was different ways that you could sort of set yourself up. But, everyone has their own style. And that's something interesting when you're learning tricks is your style, like the way you approach it. And, just because one person says to do it a particular way, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the way you're going to do it. But sometimes there are certain things that are like, this is like the correct way to do the trick kind of thing. But I did always learn that sometimes you could get like what we call more pop, depending on where you would put your feet on the board. And what that means is you get like more air or more momentum. So you could, for instance, do a trick like a tray flip, which is a 360 flip. And you could give yourself more pop by putting your feet sort of closer together and in a particular angle. And you could kind of give the trick more momentum, I guess, or you could give yourself more air and it would look more impressive. Or maybe you could do a bigger rotation, like a 180 rotation or a 360 rotation or whatever the case may be. So there were a lot of different elements to this, and that kind of adds to the interesting part about skateboarding is the fact that it's got all of these different elements that not everyone knows about. Everyone kind of just thinks like, oh, it's just a couple of kids in a park or hanging around in a particular street location, just messing around. But there's a lot of different elements to it. There's a lot of different skate terms as well, which I wasn't sure if I would get around to talking about, but yeah, I'll throw some out there. A bail, it's more of an American term, but it means to fall over, so most people know that. In England, we call it stack it. That's another way, or just stacked. He stacked. What other ones were there? I guess fail would be another one as well. He failed, but that's just general kind of slang. Pop, like I said before, was another one. I can't think of any off the top of my head now. That's a shame. I would have done a whole clip on that. There's various different slang terms. So it's like any other kind of group activity, I suppose, in terms of like having your own kind of lingo and way of communicating with each other. And a lot of the time it just makes it easier and quicker to conversate when you have those terms, as opposed to just literally spelling it out, being like, oh, he fell over quite badly. Instead of saying that, you could say, oh, he stacked it hard. So you kind of get straight away like, oh. And like sometimes the slang terms would kind of imply the severity as well. So by saying that, oh, he stacked it real hard, you'd know that it was like a really serious injury. Whereas if it was just like, I don't know, a simple one, then maybe it would be a less harsh term and adjective. But anyway, moving it forward. Just to kind of finish on that element of talking about, why I love skateboarding. I just think it's a very varied sport that gets a bad rap, but there's a lot of positives with skateboarding, and it's never really died in popularity, which is the interesting thing. It's always kind of carried through the years, and I think it always will. I don't think skateboarding will ever not be popular, because it's that sort of thing. It just looks cool. It is cool. Like I said before, it teaches you a lot. When you start skateboarding properly and you do it for a sustained amount of time, you do kind of feel like part of a group in a sense. You feel kind of like part of something special. And that's a nice thing to feel. I mean, I can think of, there being times in my life where, I had difficulties growing up and, maybe falling out with friends or whatever. And I always knew that it didn't really matter, because I could always just pick up my skateboard and just go out skateboarding, just go out and have a good time and not think about any of that crap, And it was that kind of perfect activity that you don't look strange if you're doing that on your own, Whereas there are some activities that some people think are strange, if you're doing it on your own, like going to a restaurant on your own or going to the cinema on your own or whatever, And it's not weird to do those things. It's just society has made it such that it's considered weird. But, skateboarding is one of those things where, you can do it on your own and it doesn't matter and it's fun. And sometimes it's better to do it on your own. Sometimes, like I said before, it can really be a healthy way to clear your mind and kind of just figure stuff out. Like sometimes, particularly in my later years of teenage years, if I was at college or whatever, and I just needed to just, iron out a problem. Let's say I was having a problem with coursework or something, and I just couldn't get my head around it. I would just go out skateboarding, and it kind of worked in that sense. It was a sort of thing where, I could just go out skateboarding for a couple of hours, come back, and I'll probably have the answer that I'm looking for, because I'll have a fresh mind where I haven't thought about the problem that I'm trying to eliminate or deal with. And so in that sense, I think that skateboarding is very therapeutic and just a good way to kind of address things, a healthy way to address things, a good form of escapism, I suppose. But I guess over the years, I just kind of fell out of touch with it because things got in the way, like university, finding work, relationships, whatever the case may be. But as I've kind of got more time these days, I will be considering getting back into skateboarding. I'm doing other things like basketball right now and football again, and I'm getting back into my hobbies and stuff. So I will be getting back into skateboarding. But this brings me on to my next topic, actually, the costs of skateboards. One of the reasons why I haven't got back into skateboarding sooner is because it's very expensive to be a skateboarder, and any skateboarders out there will know exactly what I mean. You can't just buy a cheap skateboard. It just doesn't work that way. You can, you can physically buy a cheap skateboard, but it's one of those things in life where you get what you pay for. If you buy a cheap skateboard, that's exactly what you're going to get, and it's going to break, and it's not going to ride very well. It's probably going to be kind of dangerous as well. If you have cheap plastic, cheap stuff, cheap trucks, cheap grip tape, whatever, it just, cheap is not good. In skateboarding, you need good quality. And at least when I was skateboarding, I remember like an entry level deck setup would cost somewhere between 90 to 130 pounds. And that was just entry level. You could get cheaper setups, but like I said, you get what you pay for. And I remember getting some decks when I first started for about somewhere between 40 to 70 or 80 pounds. And that was a lot for me back then, being a teenager. I had to save up a lot because I didn't have income. So I had to save up a lot of money, maybe ask for Christmas money, I don't know, whatever. It took a while to get these things. And, even if you bought these things individually, like the trucks, the wheels, the grip tape, whatever, they were expensive in of themselves. So getting a full deck, and deck literally refers to the whole setup. So when you say board, you're literally just referring to the board. Whereas when you say deck, it includes the board, the wheels, the trucks. You were looking at a lot of money. And, when I look at the ones that I spent a lot of money on, they lasted me many, many years. I think in total, I probably had between 4 to 6 major setups. And I used to swap trucks and wheels quite often and change things up here and there. But, I didn't have that many. And it's because, you would look after your stuff because of how expensive it was. You wouldn't take it lightly. You wouldn't mess around. Sometimes things happen, like if you're grinding a ramp and the board just randomly snaps in half. Like sometimes things are unavoidable. You just have to buy a new board, or sometimes your trucks have just had it after a while. Like I can remember one time skating a ramp, and I'd had this set up for a very, very long time. Like the board was new, but the trucks were old. I'd had them for about 2 or 3 years, and I used to alternate decks. So sometimes I'd bring out my old set, sometimes I'd bring out my new set. And a lot of the time I would have multiple decks at once. So maybe one deck would have a slightly faster setup, whereas one might have better hand ability or maneuverability. They had this thing where, depending on how loose you tighten your bolts, you could have more kind of give in terms of how you turn on the board. So sometimes I would have like one board that's easier to turn and more focused on that, and then another board that's like really tight and just focused on pure speed. And I remember I bought this deck out that was it just needed an update. I needed new trucks and wheels, but I just had no money at that time. I was this poor teenager. And yeah, I was skating the ramp, just, what we call pumping, which is where you're just going back and forth in a ramp, basically bending your knees. When you kind of get to the middle of the ramp on the other side, you kind of push your knees down to give yourself more momentum so that you get to the other side. And you kind of replicate that each way. And if you do it enough, you can create enough speed where you can kind of start tricking off the top of what we call the coping, which is the metal rail on the top of the ramp. So you can do things like what we call lip tricks, where you do tricks on that, or you can grind the rail, like I said before, or sometimes you can even do what we call vert tricks, where you're basically doing tricks in the air, like what, say, Tony Hawk does. But sometimes you just want to kind of, a lot of the time when I would walk into a skate park, that would be the first thing I would do. I would just walk over to the ramp and just pump in the ramp for like 10 minutes. I guess it's a kind of like a warm-up thing. Not always, but it's a good way to kind of just stretch your legs without just standing around, actually doing stretches. And when I was a teenager, being cool was really important. Now I couldn't care less, but back then it was cool. So if I just walked into the skate park doing stretches, maybe I would have thought I would have looked weird. But by doing that pumping, I guess I wasn't weird in my mind at the time. But anyway, I'm skating on this ramp, and I'm probably doing it for about 5 minutes. And to this day, this is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. The front truck basically just fell apart completely. All the bolts, wheels, everything, the truck essentially snapped in half, and the wheels and the bolts and everything just fell apart in different directions. And I kind of just skidded down the ramp and fell over. And I didn't hurt myself, but I just remember just slowly skidding down, and a friend of mine saw this and was like, "What happened?" And I showed them the truck, and they were stunned, because it was just something that you don't see normally. Normally when you break your board, you snap the deck in half, or a wheel goes missing or something, or you lose a bolt or something. But this was literally the truck, a metal object, snapping in half. I remember thinking that, this must be poor quality, because that sort of thing doesn't normally happen. So quality is important in skateboarding, people. But elsewhere, a lot of the time when you're buying, various setups, you are paying for brands, or if you're getting custom decks, like a replica decks from well-known skateboarders, they're going to be more expensive. But a lot of it does come down to brands and paying more for brands in general. So if you're paying for brands that are not as well known, then you're probably going to pay a bit less compared to like the major brands, like, say, I don't know, Etnies or what's another, DC. These are more shoe brands, but they all do skateboarding stuff as well. What else? Let me think. Birdhouse, that's the one that Tony Hawk set up. Girl, God, there's so many. Element, that's the one that Bam Margera set up. Whatever, those major ones, major professional decks tended to cost more, and they would cost even more. Like I said, if it was a particular skateboarder's signature deck, then you would pay even more money. But it's one of the few things in life where you pay good money, you'll get good quality, it'll last you a long time. But you have to be careful and sensible with your deck. Like, you can't go. I mean, this is kind of obvious to anyone that's been skating for a while, but you can't go like skateboarding in the rain, or like leave your skateboard in the rain, because it will rust and it'll damage the deck. So you got to look after your skateboard. And sometimes I would see people have actual skate bags, and I never personally owned this. Like, I just used to have a rucksack, and then I would do this thing where I would stick the skateboard on the bottom, I don't know what you call them, ridges or something. So basically it would hang off the bottom of my backpack. So if I didn't want to carry it on my side, I would have it hang off the back. And that looked kind of cool. You see a lot of skateboarders do that, especially if they're riding a bike. Then you'll see them do that. It's just kind of ease of use sometimes. But yes, occasionally you'd have skateboarders that would have those, skate bags, where it's literally just a bag that you can put the skateboard in and carry it around. And it's just kind of weird, to be honest. But, I guess if you can afford that, it's kind of useful. I never saw the appeal. I think even if I did have the money, I probably wouldn't have bought it. But, each to their own, each to their own. But yeah, skateboards are very costly. So that's my thoughts on that. But we've covered why I stopped skateboarding, and now you know why what's holding me back. So one day I will get back into it, and skateboarding is for anyone of any age, so you can always get back into it. But yeah, skateboarding is one of those things where it is like riding a bike in the sense that you don't ever forget, but you do have this period when you haven't done it in a long time where you need to just spend a bit of time getting used to it again. So like if you give me a skateboard now, I wouldn't feel immediately comfortable. I would know what I was doing, but I would need a bit of time to, I suppose, like break it in. It's kind of like having a new pair of shoes. You don't feel immediately comfortable. You have to break them in. But also, everyone's skateboard is different. So sometimes you would give each other's decks, and you'd be like, "Hey, try this out, see how it feels," and you just wouldn't like it. And it's the same in the sense that it's the exact same thing that you're riding, but the other person has a different setup to you, and it feels different, and maybe their setup just isn't comfortable for you. So you just immediately would feel uncomfortable and wouldn't necessarily be able to skate with the same confidence that you would be able to on your own deck. And I always found that really interesting. But maybe it was a psychological thing, maybe not. But like I said before, everyone had different setups in terms of like maybe one deck is stiffer, one is looser, whatever the case may be. But let's go to the beginning. Why I got into skateboarding? Where did it start? So I was 11 years old. I just started school. High school this was, and I was big into my heavy metal and rock music and stuff. So I was dressing with these terrible clothes. They were awful. Even looking back now, at least later on, I was wearing more normal, like nice, good clothes. But back then, it was 11-year-old kid, so it was like these big, long. If you can imagine this, I turned up to a skate park on my first time wearing really super baggy jeans, like goth-like jeans with chains on the side, and then these Total 90 trainers, which were a variant of Nike trainers that were very popular in the early 2000s. Very good. I still, to this day, I think they're great trainers. But yeah, I was wearing those with a very strange look. And then one of those like weird shirts that they had in the early 2000s, probably like a Flame shirt or something horrible like that, and probably like a band t-shirt. It was a very, very weird look. And, obviously all the older kids there and some adults there were wearing like normal skate wear, and here's me and this other kid who looks like a punk. Like my friend who got me into skateboarding looked cool. And the funny thing about that was the guy that got me into it stopped skateboarding when we first became friends. So we were skateboarding together for a little bit. He'd introduced me to this thing. I kept doing it because I was interested in it and I wanted to get better. And he just kind of stopped being interested, got into other things, and then eventually we stopped being friends for various reasons, just how it is. But I always found that interesting because, he got me into this thing and then stopped being interested in it, whereas skateboarding, for me, has remained a big part of my life for all these years. I've never not liked skateboarding, and I don't know if that guy even remembers that or even thinks about that, but to me, that was a very defining moment of my life, I guess, because it became such a big part of my life and still is. And like I said sort of earlier in the beginning, it's influenced so many things that I've done and the way that I live my life and the way I think. So that, to me, that initial introduction to skateboarding was such a big thing. But I can remember the scene, like, I was there, I had my skateboard, maybe I didn't even own a skateboard. I think maybe at that point I was borrowing my friend's skateboard, and once I kind of discovered what it was, I was like, I want to do this, and I got a skateboard afterwards. I think that might have been what happened there. But I remember there were a lot of like older kids there, or not kids, but they were either in their late teens or early 20s, and I was this impressionable 11, 12-year-old. And it was like anything, you want to hang with the cool kids, you want to be around the older kids because it's cool. It's like if I go to the basketball court now, there'll always inevitably be young kids that will be looking up to us and want to play with us and stuff. And it's just how it is. You're always inspired by people older than you. I think it's just humans in general. But I thought it was really cool, and they were really cool as well. They would speak to us, they would teach us and stuff, like really nice people that were very generous with their time, and I really appreciate that because it really helped when I was first skateboarding, like learning those initial kind of lessons, telling me about what the sort of skateboards I should get, what I should look out for, how to skate, all of these things. But yeah, that's kind of how I initially got into it. I was just introduced by a friend, and then I just kept showing up. Like many other things in life, I just kept practicing and kept trying, and I wouldn't stop. I would fall over 100 times. I think realistically, it probably took me about 3 months to get comfortable on the board, and probably 6 months before I was like actively doing tricks and like things like that. I remember dropping in was a very big deal, as it is for every skateboarder. Dropping in is fucking scary as hell. And the ramp that I decided to drop in on wasn't a small ramp. I mean, it was probably, can't really give you anything to scale, but if you think that I was an 11-year-old kid, then it was probably like 3 times the size of me at that point. And I dropped in when I was about 12, so about a year of skateboarding. And it's like any other day. I remember, standing there for like 20 or 30 minutes, people skating around me, people telling me like, just go for it. And people eventually get annoyed because you're just taking forever. But eventually there's this thing that goes off in your head where you're just like, fuck it. And you just go for it. Because you think, what's the worst that could happen? I'm not going to die. Maybe I will, but probably not. The worst that will happen is I fall over. And if I remember correctly, I dropped in and I think I made it. I made it the first time, but only just. Like I nearly fell over. I wasn't comfortable. But when I first did it, I got this feeling of just pure excitement. I was super excited. It was like thrill seeking. Like skateboarding, it's an extreme sport, and just like, I guess the closest thing I could compare it to is like when you go on a theme park ride for the first time and you get that feeling in your butterflies in your stomach, like you're just super excited and I don't know, super anxious or something. And that's exactly how it was. And I just immediately wanted to do it again. And because of that, because I kept doing it, I kept getting better. And I got to a point where it just became second nature. And that's kind of the reality of skateboarding. You keep doing things, you get comfortable, and then eventually you don't even think about it. You just know how to do it. And I guess it kind of becomes like muscle memory after a while. You get so familiar with it, your body kind of adjusts, and you don't even really think about it. You just think, I'm going to do this trick, and you do it. And it's only really when you're learning that you're kind of more thinking again and thinking like, oh, how do I do this? Do I need to pop my body more this way? Do I need to do this more in this direction? But a lot of it, I would say, is muscle memory. And just on the topic of dropping in, I remember the second time was even more scarier, learning to drop in, because I actually have dropped into a professional vert ramp. One of my favourite skate parks growing up was this skate park called Bay 66, which is in London. I've spoken about this before in a previous podcast, but just to recap, it's a skate park located underneath a bridge near a train, or like I think it's right next to a train yard going into London. But yeah, underneath a massive bridge, probably like a highway or something. And it's a great skate park. It's been there for many, many years. I remember when I was going there, it was sponsored by PlayStation and Xbox. So there was like a little mini room in the middle where you could go and play like Xbox games and PlayStation games when you were having a break. But we were all there to skate, really, to be honest. I remember there was bleachers as well where your parents could sit and watch you skate. And I remember one time my mum came and watched me skate, which was pretty cool. And she even enjoyed it, surprisingly, even though... actually, no, she watched me skate a few times. I do recall her coming to the skate park once or twice when I was very young to watch me skate. Obviously, when I got older, I was embarrassed and I didn't want her around. Sorry, Mum, but that's just how it is when you're growing up. But yeah, it was a good skate park. It was built out of wood, and they had a lot of different cool things you could skate on, and they were always changing it and building it. And I'm sure it looks very different from what I remember, but it was a good skate park. And I think one of the best parts about it was that it had different levels depending on your expertise, like how professional of a skateboarder you are. So if you're a full-on professional, it would work for that. If you're a beginner, they had ramps for that. I mean, it's, the beginner's ramp is at literally at the start of the park, and then direct from that is the professional massive vert ramp. So it's like the two ends of the spectrum. And I remember dropping into that vert ramp was one of the single most terrifying things I've ever done in my life. I can't explain how big this ramp was. It was probably the size of a 3-story house, maybe a bit bigger than that. Again, waited for a while before I did it, but eventually I dropped in, and then a few times after that I kind of got the hang of it. I never fully got the hang of it, but I was just happy that I dropped in and did it. It was this sort of weight off my shoulders, like I did it, I landed it. That's all that matters. And a lot of skateboarding is that as well. It's just being able to say to yourself, like, I did this, I pulled it off, despite people thinking I couldn't do it, or despite it being a really difficult thing to do, I still did it. Go me, yes. I don't know. That's a fun part of skateboarding. It's illogical, but it's logical at the same time. It's everything in between. But yeah, that brings me on to my next topic, which is worst falls and worst injuries. I was very lucky when it came to skateboarding. I never had any massive injuries or anything that was life-threatening, but there were times when I was incapacitated, is probably the best way to put it. I remember one time in particular, I fell badly on a ramp and I had a nagging injury sort of in my legs. I always had bad knees because of skateboarding, which have healed since, but there was a lot of pressure put on them. And you fall over every which way, but it's very common to like break legs or arms or whatever, but I never did, touch wood, that I never do. But there were kind of times when I would fall over and damage those niggling injuries that I had. And this one particular time, I had a developing injury in my lower back. Fell badly on the ramp one day, and for the rest of that day, I couldn't walk properly, which was really scary. I managed to go home, but I couldn't walk properly for like 2 weeks. I could sort of just about get by, so I could go to school and stuff, but I was in immense pain, which meant I couldn't do PE or anything like that, which was very tricky to get out of. But I was actually genuinely sick for once. I was actually had a genuine reason why I couldn't do PE. So, whereas normally I would just make up excuses. But yeah, it kind of sucked. When you're injured, it really sucks. Like not being able to skate for a while. It just you really want to get back to it because it's one of those things that you do all the time, and to suddenly not be able to do it was really frustrating. And I just wanted to keep doing it. So I didn't wait long. I think I waited like about a week and a half, started skating, realised I couldn't do it, waited 2 or 3 more days, and then I realised I could skate with that pain, so I just kind of, either took some paracetamol or took a bunch of energy drinks and just got through the pain, and eventually the pain just went away anyway. But I wouldn't recommend that. I think if you have an actual injury from skateboarding, take the time to rest. You don't want to end up with long-term injuries. Just take the time to rest, come back to it. That's my advice. But yeah, otherwise I was pretty lucky as far as injuries are concerned. A lot of the time I would just kind of fall very hard because I was really into doing like stair sets and doing jump gaps and stuff. That was kind of more my thing, like just clearing air and doing that kind of stuff. And there were a few times when I fell pretty badly, like smashed my face up, or like hands is always a big one because obviously when you fall over, your natural inclination is to put your hands out. So if you fall over when you're on a skateboard, you know, you kind of fall and you're dragged across the floor, and often you're falling onto like, you know, really hard pavement or something, so it just scratches up your skin and you have like skin missing everywhere and blood everywhere and shit, but you kind of get used to it. But I would often turn up to school with like plasters all over my hands and stuff, and maybe I wouldn't be able to write properly for a week or something, but it was worth it. But yeah, moving on, some of my best tricks, favorite tricks. I think one of my favorite tricks to do was this trick called a fakie 360 shove it. So it's basically you'd be skating in the opposite direction to what you're used to. So if I was goofy, I would skate regular and I'd be facing backwards. And I'd basically jump and do a 360 rotation whilst also doing what we call a shove it, which is where you pop the board and it goes either in a 180 rotation or a 360 rotation, or it can also go in like 540, 720 if you're in like a bigger ramp or something. But stationary, generally you go for like 180 or 360. And what I liked about this trick is it was essentially like a 360. So you're turning and doing a 360 and popping the board and doing a 360 at the same time. So it was a really good trick to do if you landed it when you're playing like a game of skate, because not many people could land it very effectively. And a lot of the time I would only land it when I had a good enough kind of run up. Other tricks I liked were more like freestyle ones, old school like boneless. I really liked doing a 360 boneless, like if I got enough speed. It was a really cool trick, especially if you did it off of a ramp or something. You get like a lot of air, and you know, there were some people that were against doing old school flat land tricks and stuff, but I always thought that they had a place in skateboarding, and they were just fun to pop here and there. And you know, I even won games of skate actually by only doing old freestyle tricks. So I think there's a lot to be said for older styles of tricks. Other than that, yeah, probably just to shove it in general. I really like that trick. Even to this day, it's a pretty easy trick, and it looks cool, and it's just a nice trick to do. You know, because not everyone can do flip tricks straight away. You know, they take time to master. But 180, pretty much anyone can get that and master that, even if they haven't been skateboarding for a very long time. Favorite places to skate? Well, I mentioned Base 66. That's probably one of my absolute favorites. But apart from that, it was probably some of my local skate parks. There was a skate park in a place called Harrow, which if you're a Londoner, you might know, which was entirely made of concrete. And it had like, I remember this big, massive bowl at the back that they called a peanut, which went into the ground and was really scary because one was a smaller hole and then one was a much bigger one. So you sort of skate into the smaller one and then get loads of speed and go into the bigger one, or you could be even crazier and drop in, like sort of roll into the bigger one and go into the smaller one. But I suppose the biggest draw about that skate park was it was all entirely made of concrete. I mean, there is wooden ramps there now as well, which is cool, but the concrete element was something different that we weren't really used to, because a lot of the skate parks around my area were built from pure metal, unfortunately, which metal sucks to ride on. I just think skate parks should always really be built from wood. Metal skate parks just suck, especially in the summer. If you're skating in the summer and you fall over and like maybe you don't have a shirt on, then you get burnt to death. Of course, even if you are wearing a shirt, if you just fall over and your hands go on the ramp, it's hot metal, so it's gonna burn you. So metal is just not fun at all, and it hurts obviously to fall. I mean, it always hurts to fall in skateboarding, but it hurts less when you're falling on wood. if the wood is well maintained. Obviously, if it's not well maintained, then it's also equally dangerous. Concrete obviously was super painful to skate on, but these were like more old school 80s style ramps and bowls and stuff, and they had this thing called a snake run, which I really liked, that didn't really require any particular skill other than being able to, you know, I suppose, ride on your board well and balance well. And you basically, the reason it's called a snake run is it looks a bit like a snake, so it kind of twists and bends like that, and it gets bigger, and the gaps between get wider and wider. So basically, you're almost doing like a sort of a wall ride kind of thing, the further in you get into the snake run. And when you get to the end, it's like really, really big, and you're really deep in the ground. And I really just like that because of the speed you'd get and the ability to just control the board successfully the whole way through. I thought that was really fun, and I really enjoyed doing that. Other than that, other favourite skate parks, you know, I mean, there wasn't that many where I grew up. There were a few here and there. But like a lot of the time they were too small. So I guess, yeah, the favourites were for me that concrete one in Harrow and Bay 66. But a lot of the time I would just skate streets. I really enjoyed doing that, like skating universities and local spots near me. I'd always just look for places in various spots that I would go to, or areas around London, and just skate them, and that was equally as fun, and so in many ways kind of even more fun, because sometimes you could look at a spot and not necessarily think that it's a skate worthy spot, but you could still skate it. You know, like when I was at university, that happened. Like we didn't really have any skate parks around us, but I found someone else that was into skateboarding, and we decided to kind of skate around our local area. We managed to find spots near like car parks and stuff that had actually good stuff to grind on and do tricks off. So there's a certain amount of innovation involved with skateboarding and creativity, as far as what I said earlier in the podcast about being able to kind of visualize what you can achieve in a particular location as far as skateboarding is concerned. But I suppose the more you know with skateboarding, and then the more tricks you can do, and the more confident that you are, the more you're going to be able to do in locations in general. So yeah, bringing this all to a close. It's been a fun little podcast about skateboarding. How long have we been? I was going to say skating then. About an hour. Yeah, that's what I thought it would be. Skateboarding. I mean, I think it's something that's worth getting into. I think everyone should have a punt at it. You know, the only thing I would say about skateboarding is that you need to persevere in the beginning stages. If you're going to take it seriously, it's going to take you a long time. I mean, bear in mind, the bulk of my skateboarding happened between the ages of about 11 to 17. And I was going out and skateboarding every single day. Like every day after school, sometimes before school. A lot of the time I would finish school and go straight to the skate park. That was, for a good couple of years, every single day, that's what my life would be. Go to school, go to the skate park. Go to school, go to the skate park. Wake up early on a weekend, go to London and skate, or go to my local skate park and skate. There was a lot of just practice. And I'm kind of amazed that I got up really early and did that, because it's the sort of thing that, you know, it takes a lot of perseverance and motivation and strength to be able to push yourself to do that. And I don't think everyone necessarily has that patience and will, I guess, to do it. And skateboarding is not the sort of thing that you can just get good at overnight. It takes a lot of practice, and, you know, a lot of people give up initially, and a lot of the time when I hear people talk about giving up, they say, oh yeah, you know, it was too difficult, it was too hard, I just couldn't do it. And it's like, you have to stick with it. You have to do it, I would say, for at least 6 months before you start getting comfortable. You know, that's when I started getting comfortable. It was very frustrating in the beginning, watching everyone else getting really, really good, and here's me, this kind of greenhorn who sucks. But, you know, skateboarding, if nothing else, kind of gave me this understanding that anything that you work at in life, you can get to the very top and you can get very good if you put that time and work and effort in. You know, it was exactly the same for me with music, with learning guitar. Like, I was utterly useless when it came to guitar when I first started. I'd say it took the better part of a year to be able to even play a decent tune, whereas now I feel really comfortable. You know, I've been playing music for many years, writing and playing in various projects and stuff, but I hear people say the same thing all the time when it comes to that. They're always like, wow, you know, you can play guitar, that's amazing, I could never do that. And I always say, no, that's bollocks. You can do anything if you put your mind to it and you put the time in. That's the important thing. You've got to put the time and the effort in to get to that level that you at first thought is not possible. You know, I had the same thing with skateboarding, same thing with music, same thing with everything I've done in my life. You know, you start at the bottom and you work your way up, and the learning never stops. You know, with skateboarding, you could be the best skateboarder ever, and there'll still be tricks that you don't know or don't learn. I mean, or don't know how to do just yet. I mean, even skateboarders like Tony Hawk, who's been at the very height of skateboarding for generations and has done probably everything there is to do. Even he's learning tricks. Like, I think, what is he, in his 50s now? You know, there's always new stuff to be learned and new grounds to be broken, and I guess that's just the fun of skateboarding in general is you know, there are many different people doing it for lots of different reasons, but if nothing else, it's fun, it's enjoyable, and it's a great way to escape and to push yourself. And I think that's the main reason that I wanted to talk about skateboarding so much on the podcast, because it was a big part of my life, and it will be again in the future when I finally get the money together and start skateboarding again. It will be a big part of my life again. But it was a massive part of my life growing up. Like I said, I was really addicted to it, and I spent many an evening and summer doing it, and I met all kind of wonderful people and did all sorts of cool, fun things during that time, and I have very fond memories of those days. And I'm glad I'm able to talk about it on this podcast and speak about that big passion of mine. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about that. Maybe you learned something. Feel free to ask me questions for a future podcast, and potentially we can have them in the beginning of the podcast. Doesn't matter if it doesn't relate to the topic that I'm talking about. That's absolutely fine. But I'm always open to receiving questions for the podcast. If we don't have them at the beginning of the podcast, we can have them for a future episode of Ask Christian, which occasionally me and Dutch Deals will do. But yeah, anyway, I hope to all my listeners on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever else you're listening to the Christian Reeve podcast, that you enjoyed this podcast. I hope it was informative. I hope that you got something out of it. You know, I hope it wasn't just me rambling and you listening and thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? I hope that you got something from this and that it was enjoyable, because it was fun for me to reminisce and to talk about this passion of mine. And I think that's the biggest reason that I love doing this podcast so much, is that I get to talk about things that I'm passionate about, or, you know, put my thoughts out there, tell you what I think about certain things, and see what you think about it. So yeah, drawing it to a close. Thank you so much for listening. Again, thank you for always listening and supporting the podcast. It means a lot to me. And yeah, we're just going to keep this train rolling, see where we go. So thank you so much. And until next time, peace out, one love. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.